Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast presented by the Chargers Podcast Network. My name is Steven, and I am your host. And joining me, as always, is my guy Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing today?
Doing very well. Not too bad for a Monday. How about you?
Doing good. On summer break, I work at a year-round school, so we get 2 weeks off, but didn't have to go to work today. Went and hit the links a little bit, got a little sun and some, my face is a little red today, so apologies for that. Got to use the sunscreen next time. But can't complain. It was a good day on the links for me.
Good. Yeah, just listen to the audio. Don't watch the video because Steven's too red in the face, apparently.
No, not too red in the face. It was not super hot today up in Fresno. It was a nice day, so can't complain. All right, so we have a fun show planned for you guys today. We've done a lot of kind of checking in with the Chargers roster in terms of like what do they have, who ranks where, and things like that. Today we're going to talk about some potential additions that the Chargers could potentially make to maybe put a bow on their roster. Some very notable names that have recently been released, and then we'll also talk about some potential trade candidates for the Chargers. So good show today, just kind of assessing, maybe feeling like the Chargers are one piece away in a certain position group. Looking long term is something I think is very valuable as we head into the final months of the off season here.
Ready. I'm ready when you are.
As always, Tyler and I are fans of the team, just like you guys are. So our opinions that we express today and every single week are not always reflective of the Chargers organization themselves. At the end of the day, we are independent content creators. Here to have a good time, here to talk about some football stuff, and hopefully have some good discussion with you guys in the comments as well. So, as always, feel free to subscribe to the Chargers channel here, as well as maybe go over to the Guilty as Charged podcast channel and leave us a comment and a subscription over there as well. We really appreciate that. So that being said, Tyler, there's been a lot of talk on social media about the Chargers potentially adding DeAndre Hopkins or Dalvin Cook, who are recently released players. DeAndre Hopkins, of course, has kind of begun his free agency tour, visiting with the Tennessee Titans this week, and the New England Patriots coming up here after that, potentially taking other visits as well. So let's start with Dalvin Cook, recently released from the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, the Chargers have some connections to Dalvin in the form of Eric Kendricks, Ryan Ficken, and Jeff Howard. Obviously not like his former position coach or anything like that, but, guys who were around him, on the coaching staff, and obviously Eric Kendricks, one of his former team captains. So what would you make of the Chargers potentially being interested in Mr. Dalvin Cook?
Interested is fine by me. And for what it's worth, also, Derwin James also played with Dalvin Cook at Florida State. So there's another connection there, but granted, not on the offensive side of the football. I would be okay if they were interested in him, of course, because it's almost obvious. Is there a running back behind Austin Eckler that is better, or is projected to be better, or has shown to be better than Dalvin Cook? No. At this point, no, there is not. If Joshua Kelly had played the entire year last year, we're not having this conversation, especially if those stats that he had while he was playing so well translated over the course of the year. But he didn't play the entire year, and it was really his only year of really solid numbers, whereas the previous years he was hurt or the numbers weren't great, and then this past season he couldn't play the full year either. And then Isaiah Spiller, I have all the hope in the world for him. I hope he's fantastic. I hope he's, the next LaDainian Tomlinson. But for right now, we don't know anything about him. We know a lot more about Dalvin Cook. So the Chargers being interested in him, in Dalvin Cook, would make sense. And I'd understand why they would add him to the rotation, because Kellen Moore has shown that he's really solid working with those two running backs. We even talked about Ezekiel Elliott previously. Even though he's not the guy he once was, you can make him the runner. He caught all of, -4 passes last season, but Austin Eckler can go ahead and do that for them. So, Kellen Moore can work with these two running backs and two guys who touch the football quite a bit. With that said, there's the other side of the argument that, Ted Nguyen from The Athletic wrote about, is Dalvin Cook washed? And there's no conclusion that he's washed, but you worry about, catching the falling sword, because Dalvin Cook, I don't remember what the numbers were, but In 2020, he was, top 10 at this number. And then in 2021, fell into the 20s. And in 2022, he fell into the 30s and 40s. And so I was just digging around, looking at, the Vikings in general and how they compared to the Chargers and what Dalvin Cook did last season. And the Minnesota Vikings were 29th in rushing EPA per play, where the Chargers were 14th, which is already concerning if you're trying to go find a running back to improve as a rushing unit, because, Chargers fans, you watched the rushing attack last season, and I'm sure it was very frustrating. The Vikings were 15 spots worse in rushing EPA per play, which is not great. They were 25th in rushing success rate, where the Chargers were 20th. But as it pertains specifically to Dalvin Cook, and please go read Ted Wynn's article about this. There's more to it than this. But Dalvin Cook was 41st out of 48 eligible NFL runners at negative 0.16 rushing yards over expected per attempt per Next Gen Stats. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but for rushing yards over expected, you'd like them to have, a positive number over expectation. Whereas Dalvin Cook, again, was negative 0.16 RYOE for that per attempt, which isn't great. Austin Eckler comparatively was 19th out of 48 at 0.49 rushing yards over expected per attempt. So about 2/3 of a yard, or I guess 2 feet, more than what was blocked last season. And listen, the Vikings, they were 18th in run block win rate last season, according to ESPN. Chargers were 28th in run block win rate. So I don't know. Again, if they're interested in Dalvin Cook, I'd understand. Is he better than the other two running backs behind Austin Eckler? Probably. But I am worried about the decline in production, per play stats, etc. And this was, I think more about contract than anything else. But again, the Vikings were 29th in EPA per play, and they cut Dalvin Cook. Again, probably more because of the contract, but still, that's worrisome. So I'd get it if they signed him, and I would completely understand why they didn't.
Yeah, the cost is worrisome. Like you're talking about his contract. I forget which Denver Broncos beat writer. I want to say it was Mike Kliss. He was talking about how the Broncos are not interested in, or don't appear to be interested in Dalvin Cook because of the acquisition cost. So Dalvin Cook is, he was just cut heading into the third year of a 5-year contract for the Minnesota Vikings. Like, he's going to want to recoup as much of that value as possible for him. Now, it is totally possible that the market for running backs, which has been very, very unkind to players this offseason, continues to be unfriendly for these players. So it's possible that Dalvin Cook does not cost as much as he thinks he is worth, right? He might be looking for, north of the franchise tag value, which is a little above $10 million. But is he really going to get that? I have my doubts. So, if Dalvin Cook costs you, $4 million, which is kind of a similar deal to like what Jamal Williams received this year, then I'm definitely more interested in that kind of thing. If he has a great market and this turns into a bidding war, then I'm not interested. If they're going to pay him more than Austin Eckler, I'm not interested. That's one concern for me. The second concern, which is kind of what you're talking about and alluding to here, is where is Dalvin Cook in this kind of range of falling off a cliff? Like, is he nowhere close? Is he already starting to fall? Is he just about to fall? Where are we at with Dalvin Cook in terms of like his, fall from grace, if you will? It sounds like he's had a pretty steady decline over the past 3 years, at least in terms of rushing yards over expected. There's a debate of really how efficient and effective Dalvin Cook is on a per play basis, and I think rushing yards over expected is a good way to show that. I think when you look at his pure stats, like, you see a very productive runner of the football, right? I mean, you're talking about one of the only players to hit over 1,000 yards rushing each of the last 3 years. I mean, he's been a Pro Bowl player. He's very, dynamic from start to finish, and any game can take any kind of carry to the house that we've seen. But really, how efficient is he on a per play basis? That's the big debate, and to me, that's the second concern. To his credit, he does rank pretty favorably in terms of missed tackles forced last year. He was tied for 8th in missed tackles forced with Tyler Algier, just behind Aaron Jones. And then really his best attribute, I would say, so far in this past season was his explosive run rate. So he had, again, tied for 8th in yards of 10 plus according to PFF, and that was 30. So that was a good amount more than Austin Eckler, who had 21 last season. So I think if you are going to pay him a large contract to be your best running back, I think you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you can pay him $4 or $5 million to be your 1B or RB2, I think that's a world where Dalvin Cook can be a very effective player still. It's just, where does he think he belongs? How much does he think he should get paid? And that's going to be a curious thing. So for me, like the Chargers, they would be more of like a wait and see on Dalvin Cook. Like, let Dalvin Cook go try and figure out if he's going to be an expensive player. And if the market is not good to him, then maybe the Chargers kind of enter into that conversation at that point.
Yeah, and I even think in the same vein of a Sony Michel, although Dalvin Cook is much more high profile, and I believe at this point would be a better runner than Michel was last season before the season.
Yeah.
They could wait and see, because they do want to see, how does Isaiah Spiller look? We don't know. How did the undrafted free agents look? How does Larry Roundtree look? How does Joshua Kelly look? I guess to a certain extent, how does Austin Eckler look? Although I'm not worried about him. But they are going into this final year of Austin Eckler's contract, and so they're wondering, okay, like, where is he at? Is he still kind of the same guy? And I don't think they're too worried about that, but there's a lot of wait and see with him. The other thing that I do think that is worth noting for Dalvin Cook last year is yards after contact per attempt, where he was 12th in that regard. Eckler was 20th. Joshua Kelly, when Arjun interviewed Joshua Kelly, said, what's the one statistic that running back should use to evaluate whether they're good or doing a good job or whatever? And Kelly said yards after contact per attempt. So do you want to pay Dalvin Cook $11 million a year to be your after contact guy? Not really, but you also alluded to some other things. And I believe per Ted Wynn's article, he had 4 touches that went for more than 40 yards last season. So he's not, 4 yards in a cloud of dust, 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of guy. But he is at least better at contact than anyone else in the Chargers roster right now.
Yeah, and I think, with Kellen Moore having that, experience of the 2-back system, I think Kellen Moore would have a lot of fun coaching him, right? And I think, they would be able to find a role for him. The Chargers are theoretically going to be running a rushing attack and building it around outside zone. That's kind of what Kellen Moore has done over the last 2 years with the Cowboys, and they've talked a lot about finding what they want to major in, and that's what the Chargers were best at in 2021. So schematically, there's going to be some overlap with what the Chargers want to do and what Dalvin Cook has done in the past with the Minnesota Vikings. So I can see this being a good fit. I can, in terms of like on the field, and I can see the vision of like what they would be getting with Dalvin Cook and how that would help, improve the run game. But it's just, like I said, I'm maybe kind of waiting and seeing in terms of the cost. I'm not rushing in there and super interested in paying Dalvin Cook, over $10 million or $8 million even. I think it has to come down significantly for me to be more interested than I am right now.
Yeah, and he would be solid, but he's also in this cluster of guys who have been in the league for maybe 3 years, 4 years, 7 years, etc. Ezekiel Elliott, James Robinson was just released. So I think that they don't have to go Russian. It's not like Dalvin Cook, at least statistically, is so significantly better than those guys that he's like the prized guy of that group. And he could be the best of the group, but I don't think he's so significantly better that you have to go out and get him. In your eyes, looking at Robinson, looking at Zeke, looking at Cook, would the Chargers prioritize Cook over Zeke? Let's really just talk about those two. Or do you think Zeke is the person that they would actually wait for and go get him instead?
I think it would be Zeke because Zeke is going to be cheaper. I think maybe you could throw Leonard Fournette in this conversation, but Zeke is really great at the things that these Chargers backs kind of struggle at, and that's, effectiveness in short yardage situations, which is not something that you like really pay a hefty penny for at this point in time. But Zeke was one of the best running backs in terms of rushing yards over expected in goal-to-go situations, in third and short, fourth and short situations last year. And then also, you watch him in pass protection, and he might be the best pass-protecting running back in the league. I think Austin Eckler is in that same kind of conversation as well. So I would be more interested in Zeke because I think that takes one thing away from Austin Eckler that he shouldn't be doing. Like, I don't want Austin Eckler pass protecting. I want him running routes, And so getting Zeke in there to be a pass protector, getting him in there to be a surefire short yardage back, I think that helps alleviate some of the pressure off of Austin Eckler. I still think you'd be able to find a role for Joshua Kelly or Isaiah Spiller in that regard too, because those guys are not super effective in short yardage situations, at least that we've seen so far. And pass protection is a concern for both of them, although I think Joshua Kelly has certainly taken some strides in that regard. So I think Zeke is a much cleaner fit in terms of complementing the room that they have. Obviously, if you're signing Dalvin Cook, you're saying, hey, like, we don't buy Joshua Kelly or Isaiah Spiller as RB2. We're going to go with the Dalvin Cook and have that two-headed monster approach.
Yeah, I could definitely see them doing that.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about DeAndre Hopkins next. Again, somebody that was his former team was trying to trade for most of the offseason. They were not able to get that deal done, obviously, ultimately deciding to cut him. And so Mr. DeAndre Hopkins is currently on the free agent market, like I mentioned, visiting the Tennessee Titans, New England Patriots this week. Somebody that a lot of Chargers fans are iffy on because of how much this is going to cost, because he is going to command top dollar. This is different than Dalvin Cook, I think. DeAndre Hopkins is looking for more money than Odell Beckham Jr. got. Somebody who we haven't seen play since the Super Bowl of 2021 when he was with the Rams. He got $15 million guaranteed, up to $18 million of total value. So DeAndre Hopkins is looking for more than that contract, Tyler. Do you think the Chargers would be interested in doing that?
No. Based on contract alone, that's less feasible than like Dalvin Cook, for example, unless Cook wants something ridiculous we don't know about. It's not going to happen. You can't have two $20 million wide receivers and then go pay another guy above $10 million. Again, not that paying another running back $12 million is better. I just don't see them giving the money to DeAndre Hopkins that he probably wants and probably deserves, I think in terms of like a 1-2 year deal, whatever. But really what it comes down to is this receiving core. Is DeAndre Hopkins a better receiver than Quentin Johnston? Yes, he is right now until we see otherwise from Quentin Johnston, who has not played. Hopefully that doesn't make me canceled among Chargers fans, but because listen, I'm really excited about Quentin Johnston, but we haven't seen him play yet. So in terms of individual, yes, Hopkins would be the better wide receiver 3. There's no doubt about that. The question really becomes, would he make it a better receiving core and a group overall? I don't know, because Quentin Johnston, we've talked about this as soon as they drafted him, our first episode on here. Quentin Johnston is uniquely, if nothing else, excellent at after the catch plays, missed tackles forced, etc. And that is something that Hopkins is not as great at. He's great at plenty of other things, right? He was 18th in yards per route run last year. That's probably better than Quentin Johnston could be this year. I believe that was better than Mike Williams last year. But DeAndre Hopkins was also, out of 80 wide receivers, 70th in yards after the catch per reception. Now, granted, I'm projecting based off Quentin Johnston going to the NFL. We have not seen him yet. But I do feel like what Quentin Johnston can do as that wide receiver 3 is a better fit for this team, for the Chargers right now, especially with someone like Mike Williams and with Keenan Allen. If they didn't have Mike Williams, the whole different discussion. But they have a certain body type and wide receiver type with Mike Williams and with Keenan Allen and with Quentin Johnston and, of course, the rest of their receiving core. They all complement each other so well. Hopkins would be the better wide receiver 3 in terms of individual, but I think that someone like Quentin Johnston, who, by the way, they just drafted in the first round, so they're good. Like, this isn't happening, but they want someone like Quentin Johnston out there who can complement the receiving core better. That's why they went and got him. So Hopkins, he was a great player. He's probably still a good player. He'll probably do really well somewhere else, but the money ain't it, and I don't think he fits the 3-man rotation that the Chargers want.
Yeah, the word complement there is really the key, because stylistically, again, not comparing these two players, but stylistically, DeAndre Hopkins and Mike Williams do the same thing. They're big-bodied X-receivers, contested catch kings. I think DeAndre Hopkins is obviously proven to be a much better wide receiver. I mean, he's one of the best of our generation, right? He's one of the best players of the last 10 years in the NFL. After his suspension last season, he was, let me make sure I get this right, he was 7th in the league in targets. He had 93 targets, 64 catches. 717 yards. So he was averaging a career low 11.2 yards per reception last year. He only had 3 touchdowns, which is a bit of a surprise, but probably more of an indictment of the actual Cardinals offense last season. But stylistically, he does the same thing that Mike Williams does. He runs go balls, he runs posts, he runs slants. He's a big body contested catch player. So I don't want more of those. I don't think we need another jump ball guy. I'm cool with Mike Williams in that regard, and I think Josh Palmer has shown that he can do that as well. Quentin Johnson is able to do that. So I understand why people would be interested in him. He's a great player, right? And he apparently really likes Justin Herbert and would love catching passes from him, which I don't blame him. I think Justin Herbert is a fantastic quarterback, right? So it's a fun conversation to talk about, imagining Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Williams, and Quentin Johnston. Like, that's a fantastic wide receiver quartet for sure. But I'm just not sure how feasible this is in terms of the cap sheet, and also just like you're talking about, the on-field fit isn't as clean as Dalvin Cook. For Dalvin Cook, we could understand what the vision would be. There's schematic familiarity. He complements the room very, very well. With DeAndre Hopkins, it's just not a clean fit. It's kind of, square hole, round peg kind of situation where you're just trying to force in a really talented player, one of the best of this generation, into a room, into an offense that just might not be the best fit for him.
Yeah. And I think he's come out and said, look, it's not about money. I do want to go to a contender and win. If that were the case, I don't think I would have visited the Titans and the Patriots first. And if it were about winning and not the money, he would have signed with the Chiefs for $800,000, which is not going to happen either. At least I hope it doesn't. But yeah, good player, great player from last 9-10 years, whatever it is. Just not the different timings for this organization for Hopkins.
Yeah, this is next year when the Chargers might have to make a decision on Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, and they need, a veteran receiver to fill that Mike Williams role. At that point, I could understand a DeAndre Hopkins signing. He would be another year older, obviously, but very curious to see where he does end up, because he's saying all the right things in terms of, I want to go win a Super Bowl, I want to contend, and then also saying that he wants over $18 million and visiting the Titans and the Patriots. So just a bit of a head scratcher there.
Yeah, just a little bit. Wish him the best.
Yes, 100%. I think it's very cool that he likes Justin Herbert so much. Definitely think that's cool. All right, so Tyler and I have brought up a couple names here, or prepared a couple names to look at some potential trade targets for the Chargers as well. Again, as we head into the late parts of the offseason, rounding out the roster, adding some pieces. Again, they have one roster spot available. That can change, but the first one that I wanted to bring up is Mr. Noah Fant, somebody that has ties to Brandon Staley from their time in Denver. One of the more intriguing tight ends of the last few years, right? He was a first-round pick by the Broncos, a part of the Russell Wilson trade, a piece that the Seattle Seahawks were at least reportedly very excited about. We've talked a lot about the tight end room maybe needing one more piece here. Tyler, what would you make of potentially trading for Noah Fant?
I'm going to throw an audible here, and I would say that'd be the disappointing acquisition from a Seahawks tight end.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at Colby Parkinson on the last year of his deal, who likely costs less to trade for, and he will, not a former first rounder. About $5.5 million cheaper, graded out better as a run blocker. 8th in the NFL as a run. Not granted, run blocking grades are subjective, but I haven't graded all the blocking tight ends in the NFL, and you haven't either. So 8th in the NFL ahead of Fant at 51st. He's the third receiving priority on his team. So he's priority number 3, in terms of tight ends, I should say. Priority number 3 in an offense that just added Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zach Charbonnet. Not that he's a target hog, but still. But of those 3 tight ends, he's first in yards per reception, yards after the catch per reception, yards per route run. No drops his entire career. Spends about half his snaps in line. Noah Fant, I was looking at Noah Fant's numbers because I wanted to know, when you brought him up, I'm like, great, that makes a ton of sense. Another tight end for this room. We've been kind of dying for maybe a true number 1 or a true number 2 or even a true number 3. And the Chargers have a lot of question marks at all three of those spots. Fant would settle in somewhere, I think as at worst, a solid number 2. But I just think Colby Parkinson, for his role and his numbers and his cost, I actually ended up liking him looking at the numbers more than someone like Noah Fant.
Yeah, Colby Parkinson put on one of the better blocking performances of an opposing tight end that I've watched over the last 3 years. What he did against the Chargers last year on tape, man, is a lot of fun. If you're a big fan of blocking tight ends, Colby Parkinson is a guy for you. So I don't hate that. I think Colby Parkinson would be a solid option. Again, complementing what the Chargers already have. You get him and Donald Parham as your two main blockers. I would feel really, really good about that. Again, cheaper, like you mentioned as well. Maybe behind some guys that doesn't allow him to show his full repertoire as a football player. Mm-hmm. Will Dissly has been on the Seahawks forever. They love that guy. And then Noah Fant, they invested a lot in him. He was a part of the Russell Wilson trade. So the reason I wanted to bring up Noah Fant is not so much to complement the Chargers room, but potentially being their long-term tight end 1. This is something that the Chargers have struggled to find in the post-Hunter Henry era, and he wasn't a super long-term fit either. So Noah Fant is interesting to me. He actually had his lowest production of his career this past year with the Seahawks. He only had 65 targets, which was his lowest since his rookie season. 51 catches, again, lowest since his rookie season. And they really kind of turned him into a big slot receiver. That was not something that he had done previously. But in 2022, his slot percentage it skyrocketed up from his previous career high. His previous career high was as a rookie in 2019 at 27%. This past season, it was 41.3%. So again, that was really like a big difference for him. They really kind of condensed his workload. He didn't get to run as many deep routes as previously. His ADOT was lower. So they really kind of turned him into the safety blanket, and it turned into his, least productive season of his career. It's interesting here because they drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba, who you just mentioned. That's his role. He's the slot guy. He's the safety blanket. So I'm just curious about like where the fit is in Seattle for Noah Fant. The Seahawks have never really used a tight end that much outside of like Greg Olsen the 1 year that he was there. It's not been a position that they really prioritize. So we've seen them kind of focus more on these guys like Will Dissly and Colby Parkinson. And so I don't know if there's a place long-term for Noah Fant in Denver. So I would be curious to see what he would look like with the Chargers. You get him in here, get him in his building. He's probably your tight end 2 this year, but maybe he's your long-term tight end 1. I think that's a shot that I would be willing to take because tight end is such a hard position to draft. We just had the best tight end drafted probably ever, and the Chargers didn't take one, which is fine. I totally understand that process, right? But they do need a long-term tight end, and I would be interested in Noah Fant and his long-term potential. This is a guy who we saw put up 670 yards in 2020 and 2021 with some combination of Drew Lock and others in Denver. So I think the talent is there for Noah Fant to outproduce what he has put on the field, and I think that's a chance the Chargers should be at least considering right now.
All right, first off, completely forgot that Greg Olsen played for the Seahawks at all. So thank you for that. Blast from 2 years ago, but still I completely forgot about that. Couple questions then with that. So with how he plays and how they used him, and maybe that changes, of course, with a different team and Kellen Moore, but how does he fit then in the short term with Gerald Everett, who's going to be more your slot guy, less in line? And then in terms of long term, like, yeah, this is your long term fit and your tight end 1, which I'd love. Don't get me wrong. Justin Herbert needs a consistent, for 4 years, you just know who your tight end 1 is. But can the Chargers pull that off financially, do you think?
I think they could, because he's not going to be a guy that's going to command top dollar with his next contract. He's not put up that kind of money. Then again, the Browns paid David Njoku, $12 million after his career high of like 350 yards receiving or whatever it was. But Noah Fant coming here, I think he would complement Gerald Everett's skill set really well as pass catchers. I would love for Donald Parham to be healthy, right? And I think he's shown a lot of potential, but he does have some injury concern. And so I think you can get a similar role with Noah Fant in terms of, working the seams from the inline position, gives you some yards after catch ability. He's able to be a big body in the red zone. I think you don't necessarily have to view Everett and Noah Fant in a similar way because Gerald Everett can do so much in the slot. Like, that is something that Gerald Everett is very comfortable with and excels at. That's not really Noah Fant's game, or at least it wasn't in his first 3 seasons. So it's just a name I thought that was interesting because his role in Seattle is just kind of in question, and his long-term fit is in question. And it just doesn't really fit like their style. But maybe with the Chargers, that could be really kind of the piece that they are missing in the tight end room and could really kind of, stabilize the long-term outlook at the position.
Yeah, I certainly watched that Chargers-Seattle game, watched Seattle run the football, and I just looked at the tight ends and went, I want one of those. And 2 of those would be great, too. Like, they just were fantastic. So I would get it. Honestly, any of these guys, I would totally understand.
Yeah, I do think Noah Fant is at least like a serviceable blocker. I don't think he's as bad as his grade indicates, but I don't think he's like an elite blocker by any means either.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the other one that we wanted to wrap the show up here with is a former draft mate of Justin Herbert, and that is Mr. Chase Young. Not a ton of connections there, obviously, with Chase Young being a younger player, mostly being in Washington for the bulk of his career. Actually, not mostly, all of Washington. The Commanders have declined his 5th-year option, so he's going to be a free agent after this upcoming season. They've paid a lot of money to their interior. They're kind of doing it backwards. Montez Sweat, also a free agent. He's playing on his 5th-year option this year. So the Commanders probably only getting to keep one of these 2 guys. So long-term outlook in question for Chase Young, Tyler. But what would you make and what would you think the process is in potentially considering Chase Young?
You have to consider 2 things. The cost, or I guess 3 things. So the cost of it, of course. What is the cost of the acquisition? Will they be taking any of this contract, etc.? And that's something for people smarter than me to discuss and figure out. I don't care about that part. Someone else will figure it out for me. The next thing is, and maybe the biggest thing, is that do you feel like you're a team and a defense that can take Chase Young, a guy who was so talented, and everyone said, you look at Nick Bosa, look at Joey Bosa. Well, this Chase Young guy is actually the best of the 3. Hasn't panned out like that, but he had so much talent. Can you take him and revitalize his career like you did for a lot of guys on your front 7 last season? So I don't know where Kyle Van Noy's career is going to go from this point, but he finished out very, very strong. You look at someone like Austin Johnson; he was on his way to having a career year. Sebastian Joseph Day had a solid year, although didn't get to see it completely. Morgan Fox had arguably the best year of his entire career. So can you take someone like Chase Young and do the same for him? I think the answer is yes there. And I think you also feel good that not just as a pass rusher, which is something that they would have to further and develop, but he is better as a run defender, at least statistically. I can't say I've watched a ton of Washington Commanders film. The only time I've really watched them is when Rashawn Slater made him disappear, but he does that to everybody. But 27th in run stop rate out of 123 people. 3rd in average depth of tackle against the run is really solid too. And that's easy
that was in
2022
or 2021?
It might have been 2021. I don't know. Anyway, point is, I do believe that you can at least, if nothing else, take him and add him to be a stronger run defender for your team rather than a pass rusher. Is that worth the trade acquisition cost? I'm not sure. But I do feel like I would love the Chargers to be a team that consistently is able to find, it's weird to call him this, but like a reclamation project, and he's not really, but take him, maximize him, send him out, and Chase Young, a former first rounder, everyone knows him and his talent. If he has a solid year, you get a heck of a comp pick for him if he's able to maximize that and maximize his contract value, which he should. He's a pass rusher who is well known, who should be coming off of a really strong year and from a hopefully strong defense. So I would say yes to this as long as the cost to acquire him is fine. I love Thule. I think Thule is going to be awesome. but he is very, very young. And we saw last year, different because this player was a 4th rounder, but Isaiah Spiller, was 20 himself, and they've slowly worked him into things. And I don't know if that's the same for the defensive side of the ball with Tuli Tuipulotu. But I don't believe he's 21 yet. I believe he's going to be 21 in a bit. So the Chargers might slowly work him in. They might want someone more proven at this point. Chase Young probably very expensive. Probably won't take, just a 7th rounder to go get him. But I can't say no to the idea of adding him as long as the cost is there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the reclamation aspect of this, because I think that is what you're doing with Chase Young and potentially considering him for trade, because this is something that the Rams have done, year in and year out, whether it was trading for Robert Quinn or Dante Fowler or whoever, right? And then they get big contracts, and then the Rams, get the comp picks. So if you're the Commanders, looking at it from their perspective, what are you potentially getting if you hold on to Chase Young and that comp pick pans out, right? Theoretically, if Chase Young hits his ceiling and you can't afford to keep him, you're probably talking about a 3rd or a 4th round comp pick in 2025. If you're considering trading him, then maybe you get a 4th or a 5th round pick this year. So how do you weigh that cost of, let's hold on to Chase and let's see if he can hit his ceiling in 2023. If he does, we'll get a really nice comp pick out of it in 2025. Versus he was not having a great season before he got injured, before he tore his ACL in 2022, at least as a pass rusher. I mean, it was 24 total pressures, 2 sacks, according to PFF. His win rate was actually higher as a rookie than it was in 2022. So what's the maybe the floor of Chase Young? What kind of comp pick does that get us in 2025? Maybe that's a 6th or 7th round comp pick because he's just not able to put it all together this year. So if a team comes to you and says, hey, we'll give you a 4th round pick for Chase Young, and then the Chargers are able to rehabilitate him, get him back up to speed, and then maybe the Chargers get a 3rd round comp pick for him in 2025. So there's a lot of layers there, but for the Chargers, I think that's worth it. And also there's a world where the Chargers are moving on from Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa or both after the season. Maybe you keep Chase Young and you give him, I don't know, a $15 million per year contract, and you're able to work that in as opposed to what the Chargers have previously. So there's a lot of layers here, but to me, I think the Chargers could use another pass rushing body. I don't think it necessarily has to be a former 1st round pick, former number 2 overall pick. But I would like to see them at least add some competition to the room. Again, I think Tuli is going to be great. He was my pick for most instant impact. But we don't know that with certainty. We don't know what we're getting out of Chris Rumph. We're hoping we get improvement, right? But getting some kind of proven production, I think, would be useful for this team and just gives them some flexibility. So I like the idea of adding Chase Young to this room. I like the idea of maybe he is your long-term replacement for Khalil Mack. Maybe he is a comp pick chance, next year. But either way, I think this would make sense for the Chargers. And if the Commanders are open to dealing him, then I think the Chargers should be calling.
What is his current prognosis for the whole ACL tear? Actually, he tore it in November.
Yeah. So he should be good. He played.
So
yeah, he played the last 3 or 4 games last season. Let me make sure.
He did.
So he played week 16, 17, and 18. He only played 30 snaps in week 16, but he played 47 in week 18. So he should be back on track. I mean, we're talking about, by the time the season starts, he'll be almost 2 full years removed from the surgery. So he should be healthy. It just kind of, I guess, depends where the Commanders are at in terms of, is he going to be around long term? Are we comfortable with choosing Montez Sweat already? Can we afford Montez Sweat? So, the Commanders have a big decision here to pick between these guys, maybe let both of them walk. I don't know. So, if I'm the Commanders, I'm trying to trade Chase Young now. And, then again, maybe they think they're better than they actually are too. So, I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Was Ron Rivera there when they drafted him?
Yes.
He had to have been.
Yes.
It sounds like I think the reports are coming out that Ron Rivera has final say in personnel decisions. So I believe so. There's no way it's been less than 3 years. But I have to double check.
They haven't really had
so for some reason I thought Chase Young tore his ACL last season, but he recovered from it and came back last season.
Yeah. So he tore it at the end of the 2021 season. It was in November.
Ron Rivera. Look at us not knowing the answer to this one right off the top of our heads.
Are you looking
2020? So that he was their pick when they drafted him.
Yeah, and he was Rookie of the Year for what it's worth. I think that year was just kind of a down year for defensive rookies, but I still think that there's a lot of potential. Chase Young for me personally was one of the best defensive rookies, defensive prospects that I've graded. Still, his grade was very, very high for me. I still believe in that potential. Pass rushers do typically peak when they're like 26, 27 years old. It takes them a little bit to get their legs under them. So I still think that Chase Young has some potential, and maybe he hits that this year, and then we're talking about a completely different kind of player. But as of now, like if you're a Commanders fan, you've got to be pretty disappointed in the returns that you got out of him. And, maybe getting a 4th-round pick for him would maybe make you feel a little bit better.
There's no way a Washington Commanders fan is going to say he's worth a 4th-round pick, though. But the NFL is very different. Our expectations for what a player is worth is very different than what it actually ends up happening.
Yeah, no, 100%. All right, Tyler. Any other player that you wanted to bring up here as a potential signing or trade for the Chargers as we head into the meat of the offseason?
Not necessarily a player. I'm just very desperate for any kind of competition at tackle. We've talked about this a zillion times, but you look at, they won't play the Browns this year, but potentially in the playoffs, the Browns trade for Darius Smith, and the Chiefs get Amenahu, and the Raiders add Wilson, and the Jets add Will McDonald, and the Chiefs also drafted Anuduke Uzama. The Bengals add Miles Murphy. You're looking throughout the playoffs potentially, or something on your schedule like the Packers and Van Ness. And you just really want to make sure that throughout those games you have a swing tackle you feel really good about. And hey, like all the players in the Chargers, I hope they're Hall of Famers. But I am obviously, and I think we all are, until proven otherwise, worried about Foster Sarell as that backup swing tackle. Hope he's awesome, but for some comparison, like his pass blocking efficiency was 94.4 last season. Even Storm Norton's was 95 the previous season. So just a bit of context there. So I don't know who, I don't know what, but I hope they add somebody, because while I hope all these guys are fantastic, I don't love the process of not adding someone at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Foster, to his credit, has been working all offseason long with Duke Manyweather, Rashawn, and Trey Pipkins. So he's putting in the work. You can tell that he's cut some weight, it looks like, in the pictures from today. So I hope he works out, right? Like, I mean, he was a former 5-star recruit at Stanford. So there is some natural talent there that maybe might be untapped, but I would love some competition. Like, that's it for me. Like, it was the same kind of story last season, and thankfully it worked out with Trey. But I would just love to be able to have, a veteran in that room to add some stability, add some competition. Not a ton of great options left. Guys like Billy Turner and Cam Fleming have recently signed, but there's like a Dennis Kelly type of tackle still out there. Cameron Irving, who played for Kellen Moore in Dallas, is another option I think could. He's kind of played all over the place, but I think adding another veteran in the room would make a lot of sense for me.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else that you'd want to add?
No, I mean, we've talked a lot about the safety room. We would both love to add a potential safety in that group. Again, just adding competition and depth. I think we both feel pretty comfortable with Alohi starting, but just would like to have a bit of a backstop if anything happens to him. Because I think if Alohi or Doran are to miss time, then you don't feel great about the safety room. So it doesn't even have to be John Johnson. That's obviously the big name that everybody wants. A guy like Ronnie Harrison, who was John Johnson's former teammate, I've talked about a couple of times. That would make some sense to me, but I think they do need another veteran in the secondary in general, but specifically at safety.
Yep, but the good news is everyone's staying healthy this year, so it's not going to be a problem.
Fingers crossed. All right, Tyler. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. Thanks so much for to the Chargers and the production team for helping us out. As always, make sure comment. Let us know if you guys have any other prospects or players. Not prospect. If you have any players that you think the Chargers should be adding or interested in adding, let us know. We'll be sure to be active in the comments. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and that's it. We'll see you next week. As always, Bolt Up.